Hello, I'm Dr. Faye Snyder. Welcome to my YouTube channel, How Could They Do That? Today I have a special guest with me, my very own son, Scott Clifton, who is a two-time Daytime Emmy-winning actor on Bold and Beautiful. He plays Liam. He's also got his own YouTube channel, Theoretical Bullshit. I never taught him to swear, but he copies me. And he's also a singer-songwriter and a philosopher and a lecturer. And this is my son, Scott.
Hi, and hi to you. Okay, so we're talking Robert Durst today, who has sort of become his own social, cultural phenomenon of late. If you haven't seen the Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst on HBO, you should see it. It's incredible. But just to do a little bit of background, okay, so this is a guy, he's an heir to a real estate fortune. His family was very well known in the 70s and 80s. Comes from a very, very, very wealthy pedigree. In 1982, was it 1982? He was suspected of, his wife, Kathleen Durst, went missing, and he was suspected of her murder, although nothing ever came of it. They couldn't get a conviction. And then sometime in the early 90s, his best friend, who was...
Actually, it was in, oh yeah, in 2000, the year 2000 that she...
It was 2000, and that was Susan Berman, right?
Yes.
So he had a really good friend, Susan Berman, who was actually a mob boss's daughter, but she really kind of stuck up for him in the media. She kind of she wanted to tunnel all publicity questions or concerns towards her, and she was very defensive of him and was very protective, and she was a good ally for him. And one day she was found dead, shot execution style in the back of the head in her Hollywood, Los Angeles apartment or house, I think. And Robert Durst was also suspected of that, although they couldn't necessarily place him in Los Angeles at the time, although they could place him in California. And then, in 2001, he was suspected of the murder of Morris Black, who was his neighbor when he had fled to Galveston, Texas, to sort of escape and kind of have some anonymity. And he posed as a mute woman who was Morris Black's landlady. And he did actually cross-dress, and he's a strange dude. And then in Galveston, not too long after that, they found body parts washing up in the bay, severed body parts. So,
and he was actually tried for the murder of Morris Black.
Yeah, you're right. That was the one that he actually went to trial for.
And he was acquitted.
And he was acquitted.
Brilliantly defended.
And what was so funny about that was that the prosecution was so, pardon me, like she said, I can't help it. They were so fucking cocky that they thought that it was in the bag, and they didn't meet their burden. They actually, because Durst argued self-defense, and that they fought over the gun, and there's really no way to disprove that, especially because the only two people were there. One is on the stand, and the other one is dead.
And the fact that he cut Black up into pieces was not part of the
right, yeah, the
charge.
Defense did a really, really good job of kind of distinguishing those two questions. I mean, yes, he may be a sick guy and he admitted to cutting up the body, but his defense was that he only did so because he was scared of being accused of murder, even though it was self-defense, and the prosecution couldn't prove that he in fact murdered Morris Black, even though he did cut him up.
He testified on his own behalf, and just like in the documentary, there's something about the way he presents himself that is
sympathetic,
yeah,
almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was
but
there's
not
one
diabolical. Well, maybe, but not sociopathic.
I don't think so either.
It's kind of authentic, sympathetic, but self-control where he controls what he's going to say and what he's not going to say.
He has a sort of, if you see video footage of him, and you will a lot on the Jinx, he portrays a sense of almost self-awareness. Like when he's talking, he knows how it sounds, he knows how it looks, but what are you gonna do? This is what happened. I know what people think. And there's something about that. I remember there was a moment where the prosecution, the detective who had I think arrested him, gave an anecdote about during the trial when he was on the stand, the jury laughed at a joke that Durst made, and the detective just went, "It's over. He's got the jury in the palm of his hand." So.
That's not the same detective that said that...
I'm working for God?
Maybe, but he said that as far as he could tell, this was not a murderer that had a propensity for violence.
Yeah, that was the same detective. He said, I don't think he's sinister or evil. I don't think he's a psychopath. I don't think he's a sadist. I don't think he wants to kill anybody. But if you corner him, he will do whatever he can to
survive.
Yeah, yeah. And that's actually very...
accurate.
Yeah, it seems that the detective really kind of had his finger on who Durst was, and he really, I mean, if you watch the interviews with him, he really, really lamented not getting a conviction, and it really weighed on him, I think, for the years to come. Let's. It's going to be difficult if somebody hasn't seen the Jinx, but I imagine that the only reason somebody would be interested in watching this at this point is because it was such a huge phenomenon. So from this point forward, let's assume that our viewers have seen that, and let's talk about some specifics. Don't watch this if you haven't seen the end of it, because there is a huge, huge, huge spoiler.
Put it on hold, go watch the Jinx, come back and finish with us.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about his childhood. What do you know?
Okay. He said that he had a happy childhood up until age 7, that his mother loved him. He was very engaged. In the documentary, they show video footage of him jumping in the pool with his mom and having fun. He was the oldest child of, I believe, 4 siblings, or three siblings. I'm not sure exactly on that, but he was the oldest. And he said that, I mean, he loved his mom loved him, they had a good relationship. I'm going to take a little bit of a risk and say, given what we know that happened from 7 years old on, I don't think she could have been fully present for him. I don't think he had a perfect attachment relationship with her. I don't think he was solidly secure up until age 7, but he does have happy memories of loving and being loved by her. And
around the age of 7, something hugely significant happened to him.
He was awakened by his father in the middle of the night to come to the window and watch his mother standing on a rooftop.
Their house's rooftop. They had a mansion.
It's sort of another wing. She was like around the corner on another wing, right out the window. He could look out the window and see her standing on the rooftop, and he saw her standing there for a short while, and then she jumped to her death.
So to be clear, Robert Durst's father awoke him out of a dead sleep in the middle of the night, corralled him over to the window, knowing this man's wife was about to commit suicide, and he wanted his son to watch his mother commit suicide, and in fact, that's what happened.
Okay, so giving the father the benefit of the doubt, I'm wondering if he thought that by if she knew that her son was in the window watching, that maybe she wouldn't jump. that's like one possibility. We don't, they don't talk in that family about what happened.
Yeah, so talk about that, because subsequent to that.
Subsequent to that, no talk about it. I think Durst said his dad would have none of that. Mm-hmm. So here he had this huge, incredible trauma that he witnessed and no one to talk about. That could do nothing but fester and fester and fester. And then the personality formation all around how you live in order to hold that information in and go forward. It's a personality adjustment that became hardwired over a period of time. There was no authentic dialogue, no healing, no disclosure.
Do you think that we are in a position to make any kind of inferences about... His account of his mother is that she was just a big beaming light of love. Do you think that we can make any inferences about how she might have really been, considering she was suicidal? I mean,
yeah.
She was... I don't imagine somebody that unhappy and that tortured, you have to be tortured to kill yourself,
yes.
Would have been, have a perfect bond with her babies and
right.
would have been perfectly loving.
Right. And she was trying to adapt to a relationship with a husband who was a non-communicator and who appeared to be lacking empathy and compassion, because you would think that he would be standing in the window saying, "Hey, your son is here, please don't, we beg you, please don't jump." But instead, he silently stood in the window, and then after it was over...
One told Robert, "Look at mommy, look at mommy."
Yeah, right. So the picture is cold, very cold, non-communicative, very repressed, and also you get the impression from watching the documentary that there was secrets, other secrets, and that there are cover-ups in that family. That if a child did something wrong, the wealth would take care of it somehow, and that you could do whatever you wanted, not that anybody would care or discipline you or engage with you. Everybody was kind of on their own. You could do whatever you wanted, and if you did something wrong, it would be an untruth. It didn't happen.
We should also mention a couple of things. One that's very interesting was that when, I think, I may be fuzzy on some of these details, but when the father, the patriarch of the Durst dynasty, died, there was a sort of handing off to the next in line, and there was I guess it was like a ball or a charity event where Robert's younger brother, I can't remember his name, was being honored at this. And all the Dursts were there, and it was in the media, and the torch was sort of being handed off, and they called Robert's younger brother the eldest son.
Ooh, ow.
And Robert was never mentioned or acknowledged.
Wow.
Ow. And he wasn't invited to that.
Ow.
Not only that, we also know from the documentary that before any of these interviews even took place, or before any of the Robert's younger brother, that same guy, had a restraining order filed against Robert and hired security to protect himself from his older brother.
Actually, I think the security was hired after
Galveston.
After he agreed to this documentary, and then they photographed him walking in front of his brother's building.
Him walking in front of his brother's building was even after the restraining order and the security.
Oh, I thought this restraining order was about that event where he was pacing outside his brother's building with cameras.
Maybe they're two different things, but I know that Robert's younger brother, the new patriarch of the Durst fortune, did hire security for the sake of Robert. And the reason we know that is because that was either a deposition or something, but he's on camera and it's grainy, like early 90s footage. and they're asking, did you hire a security guard? Yes. Why did you do that? Because I was afraid of my brother. So I don't know what that implies necessarily, but it shows that there was a consciousness that Robert was either angry or dejected or
he was a black sheep for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
He was invited at one point to join the family business, but he was lackluster. He wasn't into it, and I think that might have been the breaking point when he became the black sheep once and for all. Okay,
so let's talk about, and this is the spoiler alert, let's talk about the ending of the thing. Because the show aired 6 Sundays in a row, the documentary series, and the Saturday before the finale, Robert Durst was arrested. And he was arrested for the murder of Susan Berman. And the reason he was arrested for the murder of Susan Berman was because these documentarians had actually acquired a writing sample that tied him to the scene of her murder, which couldn't be explained otherwise. It was a letter that was written to the police department, and it said something like Susan Berman's address, and it said the word cadaver.
Also was misspelled.
Beverly Hills was misspelled.
Right.
And this piece of writing that they could match it to also misspelled Beverly Hills. And it was something that Robert had in fact written. The handwriting matched, the misspelling matched. Before Robert Durst knew that they had that information, he had actually said, whoever wrote that note, the cadaver note, couldn't be anyone other than the murderer. And the interviewer asked him, well, why would somebody do that? And he said, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why somebody would do that. Maybe they wanted to get caught. I don't know. At the very last scene of the documentary, of the finale of the documentary, as you know, is a still shot of the empty conference room in which they were doing the interview, and it's just audio, and they're playing audio.
Before you get to that, did you notice how when he knew that he'd been had, they showed him the matching handwriting sample.
Oh, you're right, yeah.
He
started burping.
Choked and burped. He had his body, he lost control of his body.
Yeah.
And it took him like about 15 seconds to regain his control, and then he went right back into...
I don't know if he ever really regained control. He was compulsively belching. And anyway, they showed him, right on camera, they showed him the 2 letters, and they said, what do you notice? And it was eerie because I don't know if he didn't put it together quickly enough that that's where they were leading him, but he said, well, I noticed that this is misspelled, Beverly, I noticed that this is misspelled. And and the interviewer said, did you write this one? He said, yeah, I wrote that one, but I didn't write that one. And the interviewer said, help me here, because I'm trying to find a way to think that you didn't write the cadaver note. And Robert Durst said, I don't know what to tell you, I didn't write it. And then the interviewer, this was a brilliant move, but the interviewer showed both excerpts of the misspelling of Beverly Hills and said, do you know which one you wrote? And Durst said, I can't tell you which one I wrote. And then the interviewer kind of said, well, okay, I guess, let's wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time. And that's when...
Kind of abrupt, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I don't think there was anywhere else to go.
Yeah.
And Durst also had a history of forgetting that his mic was on. This happened earlier in the documentary as well.
Do you think they planned on him forgetting that his mic was on?
The director says that this was... that months later he overheard, he realized that this recording was on the audio. I find that very difficult to believe, which actually gets the director in a little bit of trouble because it means he may have obstructed justice by not reporting that information to the police when he had it.
Or that he didn't give permission to record him because it was over?
Yeah, but they left his microphone on. They had left his microphone on before, and he had said...
They turned the lights out, and the microphone is still on.
Yeah, and anyway, Robert Durst says, may I use the washroom? And they say, sure, and we have the very last scene of the documentary is the audio of Durst going into the washroom and saying, essentially, well, you're caught, Robert. And he's talking to himself, and he says,
which he had done earlier. At other times, he talked to himself.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Earlier on in the series, there was a moment where they broke during the interview, and Robert was still sitting in the interview chair, and everybody's off going and doing their thing, and Robert is saying, I did not intentionally lie. I did not knowingly, intentionally, and he's like repeating a mantra, almost something that you imagine his lawyer told him to practice or something. Anyway, so he goes into the bathroom, and Durst essentially confesses to himself, and he says, well, you're caught.
You're dead, or...
Yeah, you're caught, and then he says, killed them all, of course. And then at another moment he says, and the burping, which tells us.
He said.
Oh yeah, one of the things that Durst said in the bathroom to himself was, and the burping, which says that he has a sort of self-awareness that when he's lying or when he's caught or when he's cornered, whatever.
Or maybe just after when he committed one of those crimes, he might have.
Maybe. Yeah, we don't know. That would be really interesting to know. So. There were 2 Durst interviews. The second interview, after which he confessed, well, to himself. It's not technically a confession, but the second interview took them 2 years. There was a 2-year break, and the second interview took them 2 years to get with him. And he committed to that interview against the warnings of his lawyers.
Attorneys.
And his attorneys were not there, which is... strikes me as
reckless,
incredibly reckless, but I don't know if it's stupid. So Durst appears to have this tendency to make incredibly reckless choices. The cadaver note, the agreeing to the interview. He seems to live on the edge.
The sandwich.
What was
Stealing the sandwich. He had like $30,000 in his trunk, and he had $500 in his pocket.
He shoplifted.
But in any event, he was so careful, like with his disguise, the mute wig, the mute woman wearing a wig, and he was so careful in so many ways. But then I guess he just would lose his, I don't think a person can fake something that's not true indefinitely, forever and ever and ever. She's okay. You did that many times.
Oh,
so
thanks. I get compared to the family dog a lot, for the record.
So I just think it's really hard to keep a secret and go on and on and on and on. And he was rehearsing himself and talking to himself and rehearsing himself. And I think he wanted to be understood all the way up to the murder. And I don't know if he really wanted to get caught. I couldn't go so far as to say that. I just think he was trying to interact and be a normal person as much as possible. But by the way, he was not raised to be a normal person. He was not raised with relationship skills. He didn't have social skills. And
did you find it interesting that when the short time when he was on trial for Galveston, that he was in prison, awaiting his trial, there was one moment where he talked about how well he felt he got along with the other inmates, and they called him Mr. Bob. And he said something like, these guys didn't have what I had. These guys actually had a life, and they worked, and they did something, and no matter what I do, I've got money. No matter what I do, I'm set for life. And I really appreciated it. Do you remember him saying something like that?
I love that. That might have been one of the warmer relationships of his life.
And there's a photo of him in prison, and he's flanked by all these badass motherfuckers, you know, and he's just standing there perfectly comfortable, and these guys look like they love him. Which was really interesting.
Yeah, I could see him having social skills in prison. That's very interesting. I can see him having social skills with Morris Black. In that Morris Black was a kind of outsider, loner, loser kind of, I could see him having social skills with Susan Berman. I don't see him having social skills with his wife for very long, but boy, was he handsome when he was young. Yeah. So he could pull off at that age being a kind of an aloof, stoic guy. But he had imprinted off of his father some attitudes about men toward women, and he was just playing that out. He had abandonment trauma. She was threatened to leave. That must have hit him on a very, very scary level because his mother had left him. She was the first person he loved after the loss of his mother. And so, when she threatened to leave, that's what murder-suicides are often about. That people who have abandonment trauma, they're the ones that stalk, and they're the ones that often kill somebody for leaving them. So, that was there. So that was the first person that he loved, but it didn't work out because he didn't have long-term coping skills with her. He didn't know how to solve problems or relate, or, nobody did that, and she got restless after a while. Money and good looks wasn't everything.
Okay, so let's move to the predictor scale. Hypothetically, you are called to appraise his psychological state for a court hearing or something. All the information you have available to you is merely the information in the documentary. Well, first of all, how would you diagnose him?
I think I would have put him on the autism spectrum. Maybe a little tiny bit schizoid personality. You could say narcissism, but it wasn't really narcissism. So I think I would just kind of leave it at that. He was maybe avoidant personality as well as autistic. There's no pure diagnosis, so sometimes there's overlaps, and so I think there's probably an overlap between avoidant and schizoid personalities.
And of course, unlike a client, a one-on-one client, you don't get to ask the important questions about his childhood and about his life, and so you're at a disadvantage here, and you're going to be sort of filling in the blanks the best you can by speculating, but you're speculating based on 30 years of experience. So let's go through the predictor scale.
I gave him a 5 for in utero quality. I imagine a wealthy family. They
5
ate,
out of what?
5 out of 5. That you could be a -5 or a +5 or anywhere in between. So I gave him a full +5 because I think if you're raised by a wealthy mother who can eat whatever she wants to eat when she's pregnant, I'm assuming she didn't booze it up or anything, but that she ate well, so I just gave him a 5. And then for attachment, for continuity of attachment, which would be anywhere from a -20 up to a +20, I think I gave him somewhere around a +5. So I gave him above the 0, I gave him more on the positive side, but I didn't say that his attachment was as great as he thought his attachment was. And then somewhere around the same thing for attunement. I just don't think a mother who's that traumatized that she's ultimately suicidal and living with a husband who is non-communicative, I just, somewhere, I gave him somewhere around another +5 or 10, give or take. So then coming on down to emotional abuse, I gave a -10 all the way negative because the emotional abuse was horrible. In terms of discipline, kind of gave him a -10 because there was no discipline. It wasn't like he was physically abused or beat, but that might have not hurt him so much as just to be completely a non-person that isn't allowed to talk or isn't taught right from wrong and has things covered up when things go wrong and ignored. So that's another -20. So then I gave him a 15 for repression ethic, and another minus 15 for the blaming ethic, where there's a family system where we don't take personal responsibility for our actions. You know, that it's not our fault. Maybe it's somebody else's fault, but it's certainly not our fault. And we don't.
On what are we basing that?
That everything seemed like a cover-up. He couldn't talk. You know, he couldn't even talk about what happened. What was his father's role in his mother standing there? What was his father's role in going and getting him? You know, there's nobody assumes responsibility, as far as I can tell, for anything.
Well, nobody assumes their own responsibility, but it also seems like nobody's willing to place responsibility on anybody else either. It's just do whatever we can to cover it up and make it go away, but it's not as though Durst were willing to throw his father even under the bus, or likewise.
Well, that's a loyalty ethic. Now, a loyalty ethic isn't a personal responsibility ethic. They're two completely different things, and often they're opposite.
But I'm saying the Dursts don't seem too keen on blaming or victim mentality.
That's true. That's true.
Okay.
I think that was a total of around minus 45 at that point, which is not a killer. So, but, you know, I also have a place on the score sheet for traumatic brain injury, and I think that I just went ahead and used that area for watching your mother attempt and succeed at suicide, you know, and being brought to watch it. You know, it's not even like he accidentally stumbled upon it. He was brought to watch it, and then not, you know, that is so traumatic.
And then not allowed to talk about it.
I think that's equivalent to a traumatic brain injury, so I threw in another minus 20, so now we're up to minus 65, and it's around 90 that we have a killer. So then we've got precipitating events, you know, like compounding factors, and in all three murders there was a compounding factor that might be worth 25 points. Like in the first one, he's going to be abandoned, and that, you know, given what happened to his mother, that was worth minus 25 points. That was terrible. And in the second murder was with Susan Berman. Was that her name, Susan?
Yeah.
Okay. I think he loved her. I think he shot her, if he did, in the back of her head so she would never know, so she would never suffer.
Right.
And I think he didn't want to do it. I think it was a great loss for him, but I think he was afraid that they would break her and she would give it away.
He also, the cadaver note, I mean, he didn't want her body to rot.
Yes, yes, that was a very caring thing to do.
Yeah.
That's right. And so, so I think that's a minus 25 when you end up having to make the choice to kill somebody that you love just because you're afraid they're going to, you know, that must be very difficult to process. But anyway,
but
or
for
to
the
think
record,
that she's going to.
Just to clarify, they make it clear in the documentary that at the time that Durst, you know, apparently murdered Susan Berman, he got wind that the FBI was about to come interview her.
Right.
And so he knew that was about to happen, and he also and it seemed to be commonplace knowledge that she knew his secrets too.
Yes. Okay. So, and then the third one,
Black.
What did Morris Black have on him? I can't remember what that was.
Well, you know, the reason that Durst moved to Galveston was to escape
questioning.
Was to find some sort of anonymity and to escape the questioning and the presumption that he had murdered these two previous people, and he kind of wanted to get away from it all. And he, according to him, he and Black ended up becoming fast friends. They both had a fascination with firearms. They both had a fascination with a couple of other things, and so they would spend a lot of time with one another in each other's apartments. However,
guard down a little bit, guard down.
Yeah, and the detective on that case, his theory, and I think this is a great theory, is that at some point Morris Black learned that Durst was a billionaire or a millionaire.
Oh, yeah.
And probably blackmailed him and said, if you don't give me such and such amount of money. I think Black was also not doing well financially.
Or they could have had an argument or something, and this guy Morris Black was not real high functioning, and probably in an argument he probably would pull out all his ammunition and
possibly,
you know, could have.
But given the pattern, I think we have reason to believe that Durst felt threatened. His anonymity felt threatened by Black.
Right. Okay, so if you give a -25 to any one of these events, that each time that brings them up to a -90, which is, or down to a -90, which is, you know, that he was in a state to be able to kill.
And he's not a serial killer.
No,
he's not even a. I mean, his murders don't even appear to be out of anger. I mean, they appear very calculated. They appear fear-based. It's not the same thing as a Jeffrey Dahmer or a Richard Ramirez. It's in his mind probably self-defense.
It's logical. Yeah. I think he developed his left brain so much more than he developed his right brain, which was emotional and empathic and, you know, capable of loving and being loved. I think that was on guard.
Now, I think something that's going to come up for a lot of people, though, is, well, if he's not a killer, or if this was just a purely logical thing, how did he have it in him to cut up a body? And I'd like for you to tie that into his.
You know, this is the logical part. How does a surgeon cut up a body? You know, how does a butcher cut up a body? You know, there's variations on that ability. Once the person's dead, they're dead. You know, that's kind of logical. I mean, most of us couldn't do something like that because we would be picturing the person alive. But
having the kind of like emotionless childhood he had, empathy-less childhood he had, that sort of cultivates a sort of desensitization, right?
You internalize the way you're treated. The way you're parented, the way you're treated becomes your worldview, it becomes your MO, it becomes the way you operate, and it takes a conscious decision to change that, and it's not that easy. It takes a little bit of work to turn around and be a different person than the way we were treated.
Final thoughts?
You should have warned me about that.
Sorry.
I think what is fantastic about this case is that it really reveals how critical empathy is, expression, conversation, releasing feelings. Just when something goes wrong, you have to talk about it. It's a little bit what happened to Robin Williams. As a matter of fact, almost all the killers, you know, that I have on this YouTube channel, you're going to find that there's this common denominator where expression of your trauma is not allowed. So if we're going to learn from these tragedies, let it be that we learn to express and represent our feelings and the truth of what we know.
That's great.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That's my son.